taken to the government counterpart or the minister who looks after the specific area, and that minister we have looked at all the contributions from different, what out here can we actually implement and work with other countries. So it's not just South Africa. And when the president was speaking yesterday to say there's a declaration that has been that there's been a consensus on everybody that it must be adopted, it's that declaration comes out of a lot of work where people have brought in a lot of ideas, right? And those ideas then agreed on by 20 countries, and it's not just 20 countries, it's 19 plus 2, which is the African Union and the European Union, right? So European Union represent about 30 countries. The African Union is about other 30 countries as well within Africa. So those people also are going to implement some of those policies. And what we need to do from our side, from the Knowledge Initiative, is we are working with universities after this to come and say, what are some of those commitments? How do we track? So we're going to create those trackers. When you log in our platform, when we launch it, you'll be able to see for infrastructure, what are the projects that are taking place in South Africa for infrastructure based on the policies that come here. Sometimes we also have to give government an opportunity to be able to work. It's not just government, it's also business that also use some of these policies. So we need to understand that different parts of society are implementing the parts that deal with them. So as society, what parts that deals with us that we need to be able to engage on. Go to your near, how are they dealing with the issues around women? Because of that's the information that we're going to provide. It affects them to be able to come and say, we are within a specific community and we can actually reach to our people, and we make this information available.
Please, Kingsley, give us some more information when this does launch, yes, where people can find you, or the website, social media, ability to maybe internet access. How can they get hold of you to be part of this?
Yes, for social media, please follow Sustainer Bridge Africa. So it's one word. It's Sustain a Bridge Africa. Africa is one word. And then for our website is sustainabridge.org. That's where you'll have information. We'll speak in terms of what the launch will be. We have a documentary that we're currently working on right now. All that information will be there. It's really just to come and say, we have this high-level information where people are talking about policy. What does it mean to me? Yeah. So to the person who's in the communities, what does this speak to me? And the website that we're going to create where people are going to be able to access this information.
Thank you so much, Kingsley, for your time. All the best. Please do keep us updated. We are a community broadcaster. We want to get that information out to our people.
Definitely,
as well.
definitely.
All the best to you and your team.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
There we have it. You wanted to know what's happening after G20? Follow them, Sustain a Bridge Africa. You can find them on their social media pages as well as their website, because that was the question that people came in with. What is happening to us South Africans after G20? There's all these discussions with leaders, country leaders, and we need to know what happens after that. Stay with us here at G20. We cross now live over to Firaz in studio.
Shukran so much to Khawa for bringing us that live broadcast. So joining me, I still have, of course, Dr. Imraan Buccus, our lead international relations analyst for this year's G20 Summit from Nasrec in Johannesburg. Dr. Buccus, I want to talk on this interview I had now with William Baloyi from, he's the Deputy Government Spokesperson. The rare earth minerals, so there was a deal that was signed between the European Union and, of course, South Africa with regards to that. What we don't know is, of course, the details within this. But I think the interesting conversation that we've had, and I think I want to, obviously go to Mozambique when it comes to, of course, what we're seeing there of Mozambique gas that is happening there. The government of these countries, and I'm going to talk here specifically of South Africa. Where do we strike the balance in terms of the government saying, well, we need to have a larger say, a larger stake, a larger interest in the way this is being. The citizens of the country benefit much more from it. I mean, we've talked at length about inequality. Before, of course, we had Mr. Baloyi coming. We've talked at length about the supposed social cohesion that we want to see within the world, and yet the citizens do not have a say in terms of this. Just your take on that.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the primary objective, right? That citizens should benefit. But we know already that in many countries we call it the resource curse, right? When you have all of these resources, it becomes a curse, again, because a small elite benefit. We've seen that in part in Mozambique. You have Total, you have to some extent the Americans there now, you have a Rwandan influence, although not directly linked, but Rwanda is playing a great role, sometimes called into question in Mozambique. The fact that it has a military in Delgado, I think, means that one needs to think more carefully about why they're there. So when you have Total in Mozambique, there are questions about to what extent does it benefit one of the poorest nations in the world. And part of the conflict, well, not part, but the conflict in Cabo Delgado to those minerals and to the gas fields, because people in the north have said we've never benefited. It's just the south, Maputo and other parts of Mozambique that benefit. And you have now a really complex concoction that contributes to what people are calling Islamic terrorism. What makes Mozambique a little different and maybe a little bit reassuring is this idea of the sovereign fund. And the sovereign fund means that a certain percentage goes into this fund meant to benefit people. So they're already talking about how much textbooks, etc. If that materializes, absolutely good. Another percentage of the fund goes to the government, led by Frelimo, who supposedly won the elections, but we know they did not, right? That's the problem. Corruption. Corruption creeps in a number of developing countries, in Latin America, in Africa, and that's part of the resource curse. Of course, we don't know the fine print for the European Union and South Africa, but we have the world's platinum. And previously, one of the biggest producers of gold, I think it was about 60%. The new interest of the world are rare minerals. It's not oil, right? Of course, Angola's wealth is built on oil, but the focus now is minerals. And they're also talking about more minerals being found in Mozambique, and it has graphite. So when you take a really poor country with all of these resources, and it does not benefit people in poverty and people on the margins, then it's a problem. Of course, South Africa needs to think about this carefully and ensure that critical rare earth minerals impact the base of the social strata. How that's going to happen and the details of that we don't know yet.
And here's the thing, Dr. Buccus, there's a lovely caveat to all of this. You and I had a lovely conversation off air, and I think I want the viewers to maybe take this into interest, because what we're seeing right now, Dr. Buccus, is that you got on the east China, and it's heavily and deeply invested in Africa and wants to go ahead and really make an economic gain, not just a gain, but an economic monopoly within Africa.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping, right?
Yeah.
And of course, it's starting here with South Africa. Of course, South Africa and China, we mentioned this yesterday, has this strong relationship with each other. And now enter the European Union, who of course sees what's happening with US President Donald Trump. They've committed itself to Africa. And it's saying, right, we also want to be part of this game. And there's South Africa in the middle.
Yeah.
So this is going to be interesting, isn't it, Dr. Buccus? Because this battle between East and West, while we have this trade tariffs that are going on, rare earth minerals, which China is also saying, hold on, there's us also. This is going to be a beautiful battle, but a battle that, if there's one concern, it's the concern of the citizen of this country, the resident of where these mining communities are, where they, potentially their interests may not be brought as a priority.
Many African countries find themselves in this dilemma, right? You have China on the one end, you have global north countries on the other. We spoke yesterday about the need to pivot to China more as a contingency in light of China takes our minerals and whatever else, and we're sending them textiles. emerges, in the build-up to 1989, when there's an indication that, Russia, the USSR is going to fall. So ultimately, the point is that we need to negotiate the presence of multinationals in a way that allows mutual benefit, if you like. Of course, these countries want to benefit from our resources, but we need to ensure that we reconcile that with benefits for our people, for South Africans.
And this is where it's going to come, because this GNU have got their work cut out for them, because now comes this litmus test of the battle between China and the European Union. And of course, in that mix comes this high trade tariffs that are going to come there. But is this government in so many ways ready to say, you know what, let's go ahead and put the interests of the peoples first, not that of the multinationals, not that of the conglomerates who are saying, but we want to maximize profits. This is, I think, and we had this conversation about this moving away of communism and into a capital world. This litmus test is really going to be that for this government. I know it's early to say, but can you foresee it potentially happening, Dr. Buccus, where South Africa really puts the interest of its people first?
Yeah, so I don't think necessarily a move towards a completely capitalist economy, but maybe, what we call social democracy.
Sure, yeah.
So focused on the needs of people, but also realizing that we operate in a world where the logic of capital applies very significantly. The challenge we have, besides the global north and, the East or East Asia and Southeast Asia, etc., is the fact that we have our own really complex government and our own really complex GNU. We don't have an ideologically coherent GNU. Historically, the ANC has always claimed to be a broad church. So it embraced communists, socialists, capitalists, religious, not religious, etc. But in a post-apartheid context with the ANC in power prior to this last election, that ideological fluidity in some ways becomes a problem, right? Because you have maybe social democrats within the ANC, you have a left, you have communists, and you have arguably a cohort or a part of the ANC that's closer to business. That dynamic has become even more complex now. And we've seen that with Gaza, we've seen that with particularly the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. How then do you think about this pivoting to China, which Steenhuisen and others have been visited and have changed their position to some extent, I think. But how do you navigate that when you have ideologically the DA, which we know would lean more towards Western countries, because they parrot whatever the Western countries say, and the ANC claims to be non-aligned, but we know that non-alignment is perhaps not complete non-alignment. What some people have even called positive. They're neutral, but leaning towards. It's also what the Islamic movement here used in the 80s, the Muslim Youth Movement, positive neutrality. We're not supporting the ANC or PAC, but we will remain on the side that's opposed to apartheid. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a contestation of ideas within the government of national unity. And remember, you also have parties less significant, but parties like the PA, Mackenzie's party, that's rabidly pro-Israel,
and he's mentioned that a number of times.
Unapologetically pro-West. So there's huge complexity within the GNU.
I saw a picture earlier on. We just had a bit of a split screen to Farhan bin Saud, which was, of course, in the same cabinet of Mohammed bin Salman. I want to touch on Saudi Arabia, or actually not just Saudi Arabia, Middle Eastern countries. There's an anomaly, but there's a sort of maverick nature to them, because they come into this now as really a bloc that can play a huge role within Africa. So obviously there's a positive and a negative aspect to this, because in the Sudan civil war, the Sudanese government took the United Arab Emirates government to the ICJ because they had alleged that the UAE is rapid support forces who of course have carried out a number of atrocities in Sudan. A few weeks ago we saw that happening in Al-Fasher, and there's this growing consensus that the United Arab Emirates is funding them. Yet again, it's not been proven by the highest courts of the world. The Middle East in all of this, Dr. Buccus, because there's an interesting aspect over there. You've got, just this week, if reports are to believe, if we are to listen to what the White House is saying, up to $1 trillion in investment within Saudi Arabian investment in the United States. There were rumors that the Saudi Arabian PIF, the Public Investment Fund, wants to purchase a large media conglomerate within the US. It's of course Warner Brothers. So where do we see the Middle East in all of this, Dr. Buccus? Because let's take sports, and in my question, yeah, we look at sports. You've got, the Abu Dhabi group buying Manchester City Football Club, and then you've got Qatar, the investment fund, purchasing Paris Saint-Germain in France, and then as recently Newcastle United were bought out by the PIF. Where's the Middle East in the way global economy works, and of course within the African continent?
That's interesting that you mentioned the sports club. I mean, that speaks to this idea of cultural globalization,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
These clubs can be bought across the world. But coming back to the point you were making, is of interest to the world.
Yes.
This is a continent where there's a massive middle class explosion. We've seen that in South Africa, from a middle class of 300,000 in 94 to a black middle class of 5 to 7 million. One is Africa offers an enormous market, and its population doubles. So of course the world wants Africa, and then of course it has the minerals that we were talking about. The third dimension is that the UAE and Saudi Arabia, well, I don't think Saudi Arabia has signed completely across the line yet, but are arguably part of BRICS. And I think that's really strategic, right? And so is Iran. And the fact that they are part of BRICS kind of adds to their in terms of the economy. So of course they would want a slice of Africa, but again you can't think of the Middle East as a cohesive, monolithic.
Sure.
The idea of nation states is an early 1900s phenomenon in the Middle East. So the idea of being Jordanian or whatever else is a relatively new idea, right? But certainly they would want an interest in Africa, and we've seen how Saudi Arabia, from game parks and safaris to other investments, are making inroads into Africa, and I think this is set to continue. More and more of them wanting access to our minerals too.
I think we're going to come back because I want to touch on Mohammed bin Salman. Just his, what we've seen, the change within Saudi Arabia, and of course his influence from a global perspective. But we are going to do a bit of a crossing to my colleague Hawa Solomon. Let's go over to her. All right, we're still here on Mzansi Welcomes the World. Now we want to shift the conversation to or maintain the conversation with regards to the Middle East and just look at the impact of Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman. Dr. Buccus, the interesting part of this, I must confess, when I first heard a Bloomberg interview with Mohammed bin Salman around 2017, what the plans were in terms of Saudi Arabia's impact from a global economic landscape. What I like about this is that there seems to be this Middle Eastern impact globally. South Africa just last year, and I had an interview with then Minister of Trade and Industry Ibrahim Patel, where they signed this $1 billion beef deal with Saudi Arabia. And obviously the Saudi Arabian government has rich historical ties, I beg your pardon, with the South African government. And of course Mohammed bin Salman was not able to attend, but they sent in Farhan bin Saud, who's, of course, I think, in my view, the way he's conducted himself diplomatically in a very astute way. Saudi Arabia, how do you think they've positioned themselves from a global economic perspective, Dr. Buccus?
I mean, Saudi Arabia, of course, is a really powerful country in the Middle East in global terms, and we've seen that in terms of their proximity to the US, the presence in the UK, etc. And of course, Africa remains important, and this so-called modernization drive in Saudi Arabia is in part linked to the idea that its economy can't survive on oil forever. It needs to start to pivot. It needs to start to become, in their understanding, more embracing, more cosmopolitan, more open to the world. And, that's going to impact the world, and that's going to impact Africa. The impact on Africa is certainly going to be in terms of tourism, in terms of increased trade, like you were talking about the beef exports, and I think increasingly we're going to see it in terms of access to minerals.
And I think there's something interesting about him, and I think we are going to further, is that I remember President Ramaphosa came, and of course, had this discussion, had a visit to Saudi Arabia around 2018. So there was quite a huge discussion there about how South Africa and Saudi Arabia were going to do business. But from an oil perspective, we're still not clear in terms of how South Africa are doing trade in terms of oil, because Saudi Arabia, amongst the top 5 nations, are the biggest output of crude oil. So there is this real opportunity for South Africa, because obviously the refining of oil will stand to be corrected. We used to have SAPREF down in KwaZulu-Natal and Isipingo. So how does South Africa maximize its supposed relationship with Riyadh in trying to push out or trying to get this oil deal so that South Africa has some sort of leverage to the importing of crude oil, Dr. Buccus?
Yeah, of course, oil has been critically important in the world economy, and we've seen how that has impacted the Middle East. The interesting part is that South Africa's relationship with oil has also been significantly with Iran.
Yes, yeah.
And that goes back.
But of course the revolution had occurred, yes, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the revolution had an impact,
Yeah.
and the Khomeini administration had claimed that it had cut off ties in terms of the oil trade. But if you look at it closely, it did not. Right? Even during that, in the 70s, South Africa was getting its oil from Iran. And South Africa was of huge interest to Iran because there was a property development explosion in Iran, and the cement that was used to build Iran came from South Africa. A huge mutual benefit between the two countries. But I think as South Africa thinks about consolidating its relationship in the Middle East, when we think about Palestine, it's linked to our moral imperative towards them. And our relationship with Saudi Arabia will not be kind of that moral cohesion, but certainly will be about our interest in terms of further trade with Saudi Arabia. And I think that's, goes without saying that we're going to see more trade, more interaction between Saudi Arabia and South Africa. Next of BRICS, it would be important to see how that's going to...
They're actually a member of BRICS, because remember they came 2 years ago, they got into BRICS. So I think there's an element there also. So there's two blocks where South Africa and of course Saudi Arabia have relationships. There's BRICS and of course that of the G20. And I think both you and I have the diplomatic nature within President Cyril Ramaphosa. So you would feel that the president is going to really find a way of having this diplomatic stance. When you listen to Mohammed bin Salman, there seems to be a diplomatic nature to him. So there's a sort of like a complementing between Ramaphosa and bin Salman, Riyadh in Pretoria, in the way they're going to really conduct itself in terms of diplomacy.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think we're going to see more of that. We have Ramaphosa, who's quite the diplomat. We have bin Salman, who's quite suave in the world. Saudi Arabia has become far more open to the world than it has been historically. The fact that they are in BRICS, or more or less in BRICS, and BRICS has this fracture with Middle Eastern countries. You have Saudi Arabia and the United Arab, and in some ways competing for resources in Africa and trade in Africa, and then you have Iran, also part of BRICS. So that'll be the other fascinating thing to look at, how South Africa-Iran the relationship develops, as opposed to how Saudi Arabia, South Africa relationship, the UAE too.
Yeah. We're going to be taking a short break, Dr. Buccus, and we'll be back with more on Mzansi Welcomes the World. Do stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Mzansi Welcomes the World. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome the German ambassador to South Africa, Ambassador Andreas Peschker. Ambassador, guten Tag. Thank you so much for joining us.
Guten Tag, Sanibonani. I'm happy to be here.
No, absolute pleasure. Ambassador, it's a question I've been asking many of the guests, many of the ministers. Yesterday's declaration of the G20 leaders' commitment. Were you not surprised in the turnaround time that it took, the fact that it was done midday on day one with regards to this?
Well, it may seem surprising to people outside the negotiating process. In fact, it's not unusual, when the advisors to leaders negotiate. I mean, they have negotiated for over a week on that declaration. And then when the leaders see that there's sufficient consensus, overwhelming consensus, as the presidency put it, to pass it right at the beginning of the meeting, then to just fix the results of the entire presidency and then to have a free flow discussion. So the presidency chose to go down that road, and we are fine with it.
Said that he wants to make sure that from a German perspective, this commitment, this pledge is being done in order to make sure that when we read what President Cyril Ramaphosa has been calling for, inclusive economic growth.
Well, actually, that is something we fully support. Important themes of the South African presidency included in this three main topics: solidarity, equality, sustainability. So inclusive economic growth speaks to that. I think it's quite important in all our countries, in South Africa and Germany. We need growth to really share wealth with our people, but we need also growth which leaves nobody behind. So that is inclusivity. So it's quite important, and that's why we also, in the margins of the summit yesterday, we co-chaired South Africa initiative of the G20, within the G20, called Compact with Africa, which is designed to boost private investment on the African continent and also go down the lane of inclusive growth.
European Union, on Friday there was a deal that was signed for rare earth minerals with South Africa. And of course, what we have seen throughout this year is a commitment from the European Union in terms of trade ties with South Africa. Number one, how important is it? And number two, in terms of making sure that the communities mining is happening, where these earth rare minerals are happening, is there cognizance from the European Union that these communities need to be looked after so that there's economic growth happening right over there?
Sure. I think there's we are very much aware of that necessity. I mean, Europe and in Germany as well. And we have an energy thing called energy transition in Germany. I think you know it in South Africa as well.
Yes, yeah.
So and then we phased out a number of mines in Germany. So the social aspect, to provide alternative employment to the workers, it was quite important in our country, or is still quite important in our country as well. So when it comes to EU and South Africa, so that partnership on critical raw materials, I think from our point of view, it is designed to be mutually beneficial. So South Africa is blessed with a lot of. So obviously there's an interest on the side of the European Union also to get a share of these critical raw materials to be used in European businesses. But I think the partnership we are offering is designed also to be beneficial for South Africa, in that we want to have a lot of beneficiation, processing of raw materials in South Africa, not just taking them out, extracting them, shipping them away, taking them to somewhere else, but processing them here in the country to create the gist of it. And then I think at this leaders meeting, European Union leaders and South African leaders, we also signed a new agreement called a Clean Trade and Investment Partnership,
Right.
which is supposed to encourage investment in general in modern technologies, improving investment conditions, which I think puts our partnership, I'm talking now about the EU and South Africa, also on a new level.
Ambassador Peshka, the renewable energy projects. There seems to be a huge push throughout this year. When you listen to the Minister of Electricity, Dr. Ramaphosa, he's saying that South Africa is really pushing hard to have renewables at the forefront of clean energy, but most importantly, sustainable and consistent energy. There, though, is a caveat to this, because the United States of America, which takes over the US presidency, and I don't want to get to the diplomatic aspects of it because it's quite complicating. The word coming out of the US is that fossil fuels needs to remain. This is coming, of course, from the White House, the administration. Is the European Union confident that from a global consensus, renewable energies will see the light of day in terms of a global contextualizing basis?
Well, I think there's no doubt that renewable energies are taking over. The only question is when.
Sure.
And how fast. So, of climate, we are pushing for increasing renewables as swiftly as possible. I mean, that has been a discussion in Belém at the Climate Summit, has been a discussion within the G20 as well.
Sure.
There are some countries moving that fast, and the current administration in Washington has said that they want to keep a large percentage of fossil fuels, but they are also into renewables. The market is just pushing the way. So we feel in Europe that the transition towards renewables is inevitable. Sometimes maybe we need to adapt the speed with which we go along, because there are also social consequences. And I think we also feel it's an important area of cooperation between South Africa and the European Union and Germany in particular. So on moving forward a just energy transition in South Africa. For us this is quite important. Actually we have invested over 50 billion rand in this cooperation. Yes. As we see it, I mean, South Africa made a lot of progress in the last 2 or 3 years down that lane. But obviously it needs to go down that lane in their own speed. I mean, you need to take it step by step. You need to be urgent, but you also need to be patient. I mean, you cannot do it overnight. There are the social consequences as well. So the right way to go down or to implement it is in a socially just and fair way. That is actually quite important, so that people will continue to support it.
Ambassador Peshka, in the age of high trade tariffs, in the age of geopolitical tensions that we are seeing right now in the world, how close or how far is the European Union in its strengthening of relationships, not just with South Africa, but the entire African continent? I ask this question because in the East we have China, who's of course putting in its influence from an economic perspective. Would you say there's a battle between the West and the East right now, economically, for the African continent? And how close or how far is the European Union in going ahead and saying, well, we are here to do trade with Africa?
Well, thank you very much for asking this question. Obviously, there always is some kind of friendly competition. Everybody wants to be...
You'd call it friendly?
Everybody wants to be a good partner.
Okay. Well, you'd call it friendly, Ambassador?
Yeah. No, we are here at an important summit, and everybody is sitting in a friendly way around the table. Obviously African continent is a coveted partner. It's very important. I mean, it's the youngest population in the world. It's very dynamic, and certainly it's very immense potential for the future. So, important countries like China or India, other countries want to increase and deepen their partnership. But, as a European Union and Germany, we want to be there as well. And that's why, after that summit, our EU leaders and the African leaders, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, starting tomorrow in Luanda, which is going to be the EU-AU, the European Union, African Union Summit. So we're going to have our 27 European Union leaders around the table, the 50-something African Union leaders around the table. We're going to be a big summit as well. And actually, we want to mark 25 years of partnership between the European Union and the African Union. So that's important, and obviously we want to deepen that partnership as well, also cooperating with the African Union.
There's something interesting you mentioned there, Ambassador, the partnerships. Given the colonial, of course, Africa, do you feel that the European Union owes it to the continent to make even deeper and further pledges for the African continent economically? And that history, of course, stretches for quite a long period. So in these discussions, has the European Union taken cognizance of that there has to be a deeper appreciation, number one, of the African continent, and number two, economically, more must be done, given the colonial history of Africa, which was, of course, done by European nations?
Well, in this question, one is obviously, of course, we need to deal with our past. If you don't take responsibility for your past, it's difficult to move into the future. So we need to speak of our, need to reach a common understanding about our past, about the injustices of the past. So we have bilateral Germany, we have a negotiating process with Namibia to also make amendments and take responsibility for very difficult aspects of our joint history. And then also about there's the question of, for instance, objects of art. African art that was taken to the European continent and is now in European museums. So we have started big style to hand back. Important. On the other hand, I think we also need to think about the future. I mean, that's what people expect of us. I mean, they want jobs tomorrow. They want to have wealth tomorrow. So I think we need to take care of the future. And there, Europe and Africa are closely connected. I mean, we are neighboring continents, aren't we? So this geographic proximity, there's a strong interrelationship between our people. So I think we need to find a joint approach towards the future. And that is actually the main reason for me for this partnership.
One final question, Ambassador. How would you sum up South Africa's G20 presidency for 2025?
Well, it has been a great ride. It has been a remarkable presidency under very difficult circumstances. So a big kudos to the South African presidency.
Ambassador, absolute pleasure having you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's Ambassador Andreas Peschke, German ambassador to South Africa, of course, talking specifically to its relationship between the European Union and South Africa. Do remember that it was a deal that was signed between European Union Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen and President Cyril Ramaphosa. Do stay tuned to Mzansi Welcomes the World on day 2 of this G20 Leaders Summit. We'll have more for you after this break. Welcome back to, this is of course day 2 and the final day of the G20 Leaders Summit. Dr. Buccus, just a conversation I had with the German ambassador. It was something that we discussed with regards to European Union and South Africa and that rare earth mineral steel. But I want to touch, something that you were, discussing on earlier on the social summit that was happening. This inequality supposed discussion that we are having right now. I would like to think that when we are done today, there really is a seriousness with regards to this. My question to you is, in your view, do you feel that the global north will take this in a serious manner?
You mean the voices of
Yes.
the social endowment?
Yeah, exactly what we have been hearing from that.
I think they would need to, right? Oxfam and some of the other representatives at the social summit have made some critically important points. And when you think about the world and when you think about governance, it's not the voices of government. The governments are supposed to represent their people. And one of the critiques of fora like this, it take into account the voices of people. This is an elite summit. It brings together world leaders, and on the side, not in the room, is a social summit. So one would hope there is some coherence between what the social summit is asking for and what the world leaders are talking about: unemployment, inequality, etc., etc. But the other point is the social summit the voice of the people?
But that's what I wanted to ask, Dr. Buccus, because you keep hearing the leaders saying, the voices of the people, it must be heard, it must be respected. And then when we get to major decisions, that legislations across the world make the decision. But when you speak to, for example, civil society groups, they're going to say, we must have a larger voice within government. Now, constitutionally speaking, and I'm going to take the South African perspective, it's going to be very difficult, because the is not going to tell government, hey, you need to change the way, of course, electricity is regulated, or even though you have NASA say doing public consultations, for example. So I'm just saying that even though there's this push for the voice of the citizen to be heard, it's going to be very difficult for the elected, because there are 3 arms to the state, and we're taking a South African context to this, and those arms, unfortunately, rarely has the citizen making a final decision or a decision at all.
So 2 points here, right? Let's go to the first part. Does the social movements, does the social Indaba or the social summit represent the voices of people? Many people would say no. Oxfam and all of the other NGOs are what some would describe as blue chip NGOs, the upper end NGOs. They don't necessarily represent the voices of the masses. You have massive social movements in the world that work at grassroots. Many of these NGOs don't work at grassroots. And we haven't seen the social movements here. Unions of the world here. South Africa has multiple social movements, Abahlali, landless people, etc. Their voices are not here. Brazil has, one of the biggest social movements in the world, the MST, which is, people who are landless. So they are not represented. So I think this idea that the social Indaba, I keep saying social Indaba, the social summit represents the voice of the people is fiction. That it's not true. It is a critically important voice, but it's not the voice of the people. The second part you asked about was related to participatory democracy. In the post-apartheid, in the apartheid era, decisions were made by a few white men in parliament, right? There was no oversight mechanism. Now we live in a constitutional order. The Constitution is, the highest law. There is huge room for public participation. It's legislated, in fact. There's a policy framework for it, and there's a constitutional framework, which all sounds really fancy. And if I can just just flex here a bit. When they work, I played a role in that.
This is 1994?
No, it came in about the late 90s,
Oh, right.
96,
Okay.
97.
Okay.
There was a draft national framework presented to Speakers Forum, etc., and that cascaded down to municipalities. So South Africa, like we all know, has this sophisticated architecture.
Sure.
In policy terms, in legislative terms, and of course in constitutional terms. But what does that all mean? You know, our implementation does not occur. Participatory democracy is very technocratic. So when you have government officials, they have what they're meant to do and they tick a box. Have I consulted? It's in some paper that no one reads, asking you to make a submission at local government level or make a submission to the IDP. So there isn't the political will, right? It's there just to be technocratic, to tick a box. So it's not meaningful. So if you don't have political will, if you don't have, the right mechanisms for participation, how do you expect masses of people to participate if they have to come to the big cities, Pretoria and Pietermaritzburg, when their concerns are in rural areas, far-flung areas? You know, I'm probably laboring this point, but you take the IDP, which is a critical document for local government. It's written in convoluted language, legalese. No one understands it.
Sure.
And said, make your submissions in 2 weeks. How on earth does someone read that and make a submission? So, you know, these mechanisms, and then of course the enthusiasm by civil society to participate. Yeah, so the idea of public participation is there. Legislatively and in policy terms, it's meaningful. You're right, it doesn't happen.
You know, technocracy is something that I think is, I would like to feel, the blockage between citizens and its supposed playing of the role of how government needs to be. Now again, we need to bring in the legislation with this, and just in 3 minutes, that we have Dr. Buccus. But many of the G20 leaders that are here
It's unlikely to happen. Part of it is unlikely to happen. There's no accountability. And then it moves to the global north like we were talking about. And, you know, much of what we spoke about here or what the leaders spoke about may not be implemented. But you're right. I mean, you know, even let's take policy in South Africa. We spoke about participating, you know, in parliament. Citizens are meant to participate. Now, I would venture to say that most citizens don't know that. One is you can sit in on a portfolio committee meeting and listen.
Yes.
The other is, if policy is being made, you're allowed to make submissions.
Yes.
Right? And I'm not sure if you'd remember that post 2001, 911, there was something called the anti-terror bill.
I remember that.
Many
Yes,
Muslim organizations, individuals made submissions, and it did make a difference. Right? We were under huge pressure to implement this ATB, but that participation in the policy making process helped. So there are the mechanisms, but right now they're not meaningful.
Yeah.
They're not meaningful.
Dr. Buccus, are we going to be speaking, of course, later on, because we will be taking a break up. And I think after the break, when we do come back, we will be having our wrap-up session of this year's G20 Leaders Summit. And this has been. So yes, we will be taking a break, but do stay tuned to Hilaal TV, because later on we will be wrapping up the events of today. So from myself, Ras Patel, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For now, do stay tuned to Hilaal TV.
is a light inside us, a belief that despite all the darkness in the world, something better awaits. Hope for a better world. Hope for humanity. With colors of hope, turn hope into reality together.
Accelera, available at selected tire dealers nationwide.
The Antique Cafe, where flavor meets nostalgia. Located in the heart of Windermere, this cafe has been around since 2012 and has continued to thrive with our nostalgic environment.